iFanboy is brought to you by the creators of Infinite Crisis and 52 and GraphicAudio, a movie in your mind. Also, you can go to GoDaddy.com and use coupon code iFanboy to get 10% off your purchase. And Netflix, go to www.netflix.com/iFanboy for a free 2-week trial. Yay, movies!
So I got this idea. You take Robin Hood, Sherlock Holmes, and they team up and they meet Wolverine.
Wolverine's not public domain.
Oh, shit. Hey, welcome to another edition of iFanboy, the video podcast from the comic book discussion site, iFanboy.com. I am Ron.
I'm Conor.
And I'm Josh. We wanted to take a little time and talk about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Just a little time. Recently, the Black Dossier, which should sort of be the third volume, came out. And it just got our juices flowing for the book again, and I think that it needs to be reiterated as what a great book it was.
Yep.
We also had a chance to talk with the artist Kevin O'Neill, which we'll go to a little later.
Yep.
So
what is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a work from Alan Moore, and I would say other than...
Who is Alan Moore?
We did a show on that.
Oh, okay.
I would say that before Lost Girls, that's probably his most significant work.
You think Lost Girls is the most significant work?
Definitely.
Yes,
Oh, really?
artistically.
I was going to say, I thought this League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was like the premiere of Alan Moore recent work and like the best America's Best Comic one and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you could go either way. But
Either way.
After Watchmen, basically, this to me is his next really significant work. And what he did basically was he took public domain characters, mainly from British fiction and classic stories, and put them all together in 1898. They all get thrown together and they go on an adventure together.
I love this.
This is so in your wheelhouse. This is like
I remember reading the solicitation for this way back when
90s,
when did this,
99.
We would have been in college.
Yeah, we were in college. I remember reading like Comic Shop News that Alan Moore was taking all these public domain characters and doing a miniseries called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And
I love that concept.
And I remember reading it and going, ooh, because this is like all these stories I've read and all these characters I know. And Josh, tell the people who.
Okay, basically,
who's the League?
It's 5 characters in 1898. Mina or Wilhelmina Murray, who was from Bram Stoker's Dracula. Alan Quatermain, who is sort of a British adventure character from a series of books called King Solomon's Mines, 1885, and the writer is H. Rider Haggard. I'm guessing I wasn't really familiar with that character, but I think if you grew up in
the Richard Chamberlain
movies, King Solomon's Mines.
Okay, there you go.
Or WPX.
Captain Nemo, who's so my favorite character out of this, and he's from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. You're seeing a pattern here. These are all like classic sci-fi stories.
Because they've all reached the public domain, so
Right.
you could write a story about Captain Nemo.
Right.
You could. You should do that.
I might.
Yeah. I thought that. Yeah.
Holly Griffin, who's the Invisible Man from the H.G. Wells book, and finally Jekyll and Hyde from the Robert Louis Stevenson book. So these they're all thrown together by chance. There are lots of other characters who show up.
What's really interesting, just not to derail you, but I recently read a quote about this, which I found really fascinating, was the columnist on Comic Book Resources, Stephen Grant, wrote that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is like the best fanfic ever.
It truly is.
It's basically it's fanfic, but it's like super high quality fanfic.
Yeah,
that's really all it is.
Yeah.
And basically
they become a team, right?
They do, and it's kind of a rollicking high adventure. Yeah. It's a little bit, because it takes place in Victorian England, it's a little bit of a satire of that time.
Yeah.
Well, there's been 3 volumes. The first volume, they get together. I'm sorry, the first volume, they get together.
We've got the absolute editions here, which is really the only way to go.
And they have their adventure. Then there's a second volume. I mean, this is like various miniseries.
Yes.
And the Black Dossier is the third one. So there's different. The second one was they fought the War of the Worlds, aliens.
Which was awesome. Which was
I love the War of the Worlds. This was who was the villain in this one?
The Chinese
right.
boss, and it has to do with. Cavalry, which is
Moriarty, Professor Moriarty.
Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes books.
There's a bad guy in it, and Campion Bond is the person who brings them together, and he is supposedly James Bond's ancestor. So there's all this British literary and just British culture characters brought together.
You don't actually need to be all that familiar
with
those characters to be able to enjoy this, and that's the one thing I think might throw people off. is they might think, well, I'm not really familiar with a lot of stuff. This is actually kind of a good gateway to go back to that stuff if you want to. But if you don't need to anyway. It's nice to know.
It's a bonus to know the histories, but you don't need to know.
The thing is that these characters are so. We always talk about icons in the comic books that we read, stuff like that, and like. I would be hard pressed to find somebody who has never heard of Jekyll and Hyde, who's never heard of Dracula. You might not know, or the Invisible Man. You might not know Mina Murray, but you know Dracula.
Right.
You might not know.
She was portrayed by Winona Ryder.
Yes.
This is a good point in time to note. Forget the freaking movie.
Yeah, that was actually.
I don't want to dwell on it, but just for the sake of conversation, if you only know it from the movie, forget the freaking movie because the freaking movie was terrible.
Yeah, they changed a lot of the stuff, and this is out of all the bad comic book movies.
He quit acting from that movie.
Because of this movie, we don't get Sean Connery in the new Indiana Jones movie.
Wow,
motherfuckers! Because he quit.
He quit. He won't go back to doing movies. Sorry. Anyway.
Sorry, I want because I know we're bringing up movies and tying into and they made a film of this and it was so awful.
They added Tom Sawyer, Dorian Gray.
Just forget it. No more of it.
About this, like out of all the comic book movies that have ever come out, bad comic book movies, that's the one that I think has done the most injustice because I think it will stop people from reading what are stupendous comic books.
Do you remember the logo, like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? It was like it was all like.
Yeah.
I'm not going to. Anyway, but just forgoing all of that, going back and reading these again for the first time in quite a few years, I was, as I often am with Alan Moore stuff. You see him building all the stuff that shows up in later volumes. There's stuff within the beginning of the first book that pays off in the second volume of stuff. And he's building these complex things.
More than anyone, he pays off a second reading.
And third and fourth.
You read the story through, you put it away, you never look at it again. But if you read an Alan Moore story a second time, a third time, you see the threads. You see, this thing that happened in the third book, that was set up on the first page of the very first book. But you wouldn't know that reading it the first time through. These are books you can enjoy over and over again. Now, something else that was great about this for me is Moriarty's in the first volume. And at the time, I had just finished reading like every Sherlock Holmes story. I went through on a binge. I read all of them, and the death of Sherlock Holmes is in this book.
Yeah.
And it's word for word, it's scene for scene the same in the book as the novel. And I remember just reading it, and we get to the first page where it happened. I'm like, wait a minute! I literally had read it like a month before that. I said, wait a minute, that's
cool.
Awesome. Like if you're a book nerd or a classics nerd, then these are great. But if you're not, they're also great.
Right. So the latest book, the Black Dossier that just came out.
Talk about a fervor.
Yeah.
It's a little. Basically, there's a whole bunch of stuff where Alan Moore doesn't want to work with DC anymore, so therefore Wildstorm Comics, which owns America's Best Comics, isn't going to be publishing his work anymore. Although contractually, Wildstorm put this one out.
It's the last one.
The next volume that comes out is going to come out from Top Shelf Comics. He's got a good relationship with them because of Lost Girls. This book basically takes the characters. I don't want to give too much away because
it's relatively new.
Yeah, like there's a little bit of a mystery in the beginning. It takes the characters forward 50 years.
It's very avant-garde, this book, because it's not the typical comic book.
Right. Well, basically there is a dossier on the League, which has apparently existed in various incarnations throughout the years. And you don't know exactly who the characters are in the beginning, who you're following, and that's revealed. But we're in 1952 or 54, and they're going after to try to find this dossier and find out more about who they are and the people who were part of it before. New characters are introduced from literature. But whereas these are straight comic book narratives, this actually has excerpts of the dossier, which are sometimes text and sometimes illustrations. The paper stock changes. It's really a hell of a presentation.
And little fun fact, there's a whole 3D section.
It's a 3D section. It comes with the glasses. Cool. I didn't really realize that until I was a little ways through it.
Why the line so strange?
No, I hadn't gotten that far in the book.
Right.
Honey, I've got a headache. What the hell's going on?
So far, I'm not finished with it yet. It's very
dense because there's a lot of prose dense. And there's a lot of
Yeah, it's very compelling though. It's adult. He's definitely he's not making these stories for kids, which is actually for me it's a benefit of them because he can explore everything he wants to explore. Highly recommended. Hey, we are still here, but we're in a vaguely different setting.
-1 guy, but with the same couch.
I miss him. Anyway, we're here to tell you about GraphicAudio, which is a unique entertainment experience. You can think of it sort of like an audiobook, but there's a full cast of actors and sound effects and music. It's like a movie in your mind.
Yeah, and thecomicfanatic.com says the future of comic books is here, and it's GraphicAudio.
The reason that he's saying that is because they have audio presentations of DC's 52 and Infinite Crisis, as well as 15 other series they have going, and 300 action, adventure, and sci-fi titles that are available.
Yeah, so it's great for catching up on these books in your car. If you're driving around a lot, you can't read while you're doing that.
52 is a lot of issues.
Yeah. So if you go to graphicaudio.net and enter the coupon code iFanboy, you get 40% off your CD and MP3 CD purchases.
It's a big discount.
It's a huge discount. So check out graphicaudio.net today.
The Kevin O'Neill art. Art is really, really good.
I gotta tell you, at first it throws me because it's not really what I expect to see. Kevin O'Neill comes from British comics, and then he did some mainstream work for DC in the '90s. He's known for having very violent things, and it really grows on you because at first it seems cartoony and simplistic, and then you start looking at the pages and you realize that they are just
the drawings are as dense as the scripts are.
Yeah, they are crammed, and like the focus goes back, and just. He does beautiful one-page spreads and just the detail and stuff and the research that's gone into it. His characters all have a look. Even the Invisible Man has a look.
Yep.
And I don't know how you do that. But, you know, because the Invisible Man is kind of the scoundrel from the team, and he's you know, his ending is just one of the greatest pages of the use of the comic book art that I've ever seen.
These are all-time great comics here.
Yep.
I mean, this is what I give. It is extraordinary, but I give these books to people who I want to read them. But don't take our word for it. We'll talk to Kevin O'Neill about his art and his whole relationship with Alan Moore and these books and his other work. And so let's check it out.
I am here with Kevin O'Neill, artist on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, along many other things in a long, distinguished career. I'm looking up over the sort of history of your career, and you seem to have a history of controversial graphic art.
Yeah, my choice of subject matter has always been quite bizarre. I think probably League seems perhaps the most accessible of all the things I've done, because Nemesis of Warlock, martial law are very extreme. They're kind of big operatic kind of subjects to work on, and martial law was just getting all the superhero stuff out of my system in one huge burst, and working with writer Pat Mills, who didn't grow up on superhero comics, so he came with a fresh perspective on it, which made it very interesting to work on. But then after doing kind of Lobos and Batmites and lots of odds and ends, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen came up, and that was perfect for me, because I love that. The period we initially set it, those fictional characters, and Alan's take on it, it was kind of God's gift to an artist, really. You get to draw everybody.
Well, let me ask you about Alan Moore is sort of famous for having these extremely exhaustive scripts. Now, did that happen with you? I mean, did you find that limiting, or? No,
years and years ago, when Pat Mills used to write very, very detailed scripts, but Alan's were about a third more detailed when he started off, and I thought, wow, you know, it's exhausting just to look at them. You know, the Watchmen script, you think, your initial reaction is to think it's very controlling. But like the Black Dossier, when I was tidying up my office earlier in the year after finishing it, I assembled it all in one place for the very first time, and it was like, yay, it's a telephone directory of a thing. It's a monster. If you receive that all at once, I think you'd give up. You know, it's so formidable. But I like it. I mean, once you see the pages kind of come together, and you know, Alan's got an artist's eye. He does draw, and he knows how to stage a scene perfectly, and it follows through in all his work. And the only time that unravels is when you see artists completely ignore his directions, and then you're taken out of a story in some weird way. You realise how much his perspective is so important on the visuals.
Did you find that when you first would get scripts from him, they were a certain way, and then as you got going, working further along, they would shift and give you a little more of the leeway, like after he was comfortable which way you were going?
Well, Alan's an incredibly polite man. He'll always say, I mean, when we started off, he said, if you see a different way of doing it, he'd even put that in the scripts, if you see a different way of doing it, or you know, you want to do it another way, please go ahead. And I think I only changed 2 panels across, 300 pages initially. And the first one he let go, and the second one he said, you've added a panel. That's what it was. You've added a panel. Can you take it out? And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, he's right. I added a close-up of a gun or something in the Hyde sequence. It didn't work. It's the kind of thing I'd have done with working with another writer. And no one really had been that bothered, but it did. It was a kind of a blundering intrusion, and Alan was absolutely right. But other than that, I mean, he gives me as much latitude, and we've worked together quite a few years now, so he kind of knows what I can do, and he's always testing my limits as well. He gives me stuff, and I think, oh man, you know, I've not I've not done that before. That'd be interesting, you know. It's
Let me ask you, what like when you're working on that book, there's a lot of memorable things in it. What sort of is there like a sequence that you really enjoyed drawing, or are there characters that you especially like doing?
Mina's absolutely my favourite, and I think the scene where Mina's talking in the second book, Mina's talking to Mr. Hyde in the tavern, opposite the Martian sandpits, and he's sort of just sitting there hunched over. And it's terrifying because the threat in his voice, and he orders her to go, and you think there's nothing happening. They're just two people sitting opposite each other. It's beautifully written, and I really enjoy drawing it. And you know, we love that sequence. And also, I think it's always Hyde sort of stuff. Hyde walking off to his death. That was great. It's a politeness of Mr. Hyde. It's that menace in the politeness of, you know, that's all right. And there, you know, he's speaking sotto voice, and he's got this monstrous strength, and he's this raging evil and poison in him. So those sequences are fantastic. And most stuff with Mina, I think, Invisible Man attacking Mina, that was a good sequence. But apart from those, I mean, the scenes of the airship over London, I love doing that stuff because I feel very comfortable in those big scenes. On the Black Dossier, it was the Orlando sequence was a huge amount of fun, and the Greyfriars stuff with Billy Bunter. That was really cool because it's atmospherics.
What can we expect from this book that we haven't seen in the others before?
Okay, well we've jumped forward some 60 years, and the dossier that Alan and Mina have stolen reveals a lot of their back history. It reveals the history of the Orlando character, who becomes very important in the future, and has lots of because we said it in 1958. We were talking about what is the 50s to us. I mean, we've got this curious thing where the American 50s is very glamorous. The British 50s was still slightly rationing and poor and grey and a bit grim. Lots of interesting genre stuff was happening then. And we were just chatting. We said, what about 3D? 3D was a 50s, interesting, gimmicky 50s thing. But we wanted to do a different 3D. The 3D in the book, when you come to read it, you'll find the characters put on glasses at a certain point. They're the same glasses as included in the book. And it's to see the blazing world, you know, this fabulous blazing world. And it's story-driven as well, which is quite important because we were well aware a lot of 3D is purely picture-driven. There's, you know, you can probably ignore the word balloons. So that was a challenge, and it was interesting. And we have these odd little inclusions, a Fanny Hill section on good paper, which is like a turn-of-the-century portfolio. Something that didn't exist, but we would like it to have done, is a British Tijuana Bible. We got that in on cheap paper, so that was good. It's a bit of almost everything. It's as much as we could humanly do before they said stop doing it, because the book was just growing and growing. It grew from this 48-page project, just as a fill-in project. It grew into this big project, which has taken longer than the first two did. You know, it's.
It must feel pretty good now to have it sort of like it's on the shelf now, and you can just.
It's weird. I'm getting used to the idea that probably later on, later on today and in the next 10 days doing this tour, I'm going to get reaction to it, because all we've been doing is talking between ourselves about it. You know, we have no idea what anyone else thinks about it outside of the editorial team. So that'd be good. I mean, we hope people like it. We think they will. And no matter what people think of my stuff, Alan's script is stunningly beautifully written, so elegant, and so many different styles, mesmerising. There's a fake Shakespeare play or a section of it in the book, which is mesmerising. You know, it's just wonderful. His command of language is so absolute, and so it seems so effortless. You know?
Can I ask you, do you find that like the movie as it was negatively affected how people perceive the book? I mean, do you think that that's a hindrance?
It could have been. I remember, certainly I do remember there was a negative atmosphere around other comic book movies which have been poorly received. Tank Girl, for instance, comes to mind, which is unfortunate. But I think everybody knew in advance it was going to be radically different. It's a Sean Connery movie. The outline of the story, I mean, when I visited the set, it was a giant section of Venice, and there's no Venice in our books. So really, I mean, thought, well, you know, they're doing their thing. They're taking the basic characters and they're running with it. It seemed to upset a lot of people, and see some people in the cast saying, "Well, we wish we'd have done this because the scenes of the Invisible Man and Mina, we'd like to have done that in the movie, which would have worked well." apparently the ending of our first book wasn't big enough for a Sean Connery movie, but I still think it's bigger than the ending they did, to be blunt. The Nautilus was ridiculous. I thought that was ludicrous. It's just like a skyscraper. I mean, it didn't make any, and it makes no sense in Venice at all. But I can't really. But I made some friends on the movie, some technical people I've stayed in touch with. Don't bear it any ill will. It's most adaptations are poor. Yeah. They are poor. Even the ones that try hard, like the Superman movies, you still think, well, I didn't really like Lex Luthor much. He's not the Lex Luthor I recall as a kid or a fan. So, let it go. That's my feeling about it.
And this may be premature since you're just starting the tour, but do you find that, like when you meet people who talk about this book, do you feel like they knew the characters already, or do you feel like you're the one who's introducing them to a lot of these characters?
Well, that's interesting. Well, I thought when we started it, we'd have a fairly big audience in Britain, and some sort of audience in America, because even Alan Quatermain, even though there were those Richard Chamberlain movies, most people don't really know who Quatermain is, and a lot of the characters, they fall well outside of what most people are familiar with, but people picked it up very, very quickly, and certainly generally people know who Captain Nemo is. The Disney movie is so famous. They have an idea of who the Invisible Man is, and I think it has made people go and check up the characters, perhaps do some reading, and the more difficult characters, the more things that are mentioned in passing seem to attract the interest of people. They are looking at the kind of stuff that Alan reads, I guess, and also, as Alan made plain at the very beginning, we didn't set out to do a Victorian Avengers or Justice League, but these characters very much affected the 1930s and 40s superheroes, and they affected the pulp characters. And I certainly know from my interest in British penny dreadfuls and that there is this kind of family connection between all the things we like. They link back, they have quite a past, and that crosses over with Jules Verne and H.G. Wells as much as anyone. It's where pulp began.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a fantastic book.
I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Josh, your hair.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
I didn't quite tape that yesterday.
The magic of TV.
Since then.
Anyway, so
Were you underwater before the interview? Did you just come out of the pool and your hair was just like flat? I can't say anything really about hair.
You really can't.
So that's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in a little nutshell.
In case you were curious what Kevin O'Neill looked like, there he was.
There you go.
Nice man.
Still working on Alan Moore.
So
Never.
if you have anything to say about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you can write us at contact@ifanboy.com or any other Alan Moore works, or just literary. We'll talk about books.
And if you want to call and talk our ear off about the Victorian era, you can call us at 1-888-FANBOYS. That's 1-888-326-2697.
And then there's iFanboy.com, of course, where we'll have a post about this show. We put up our audio show. We put up our pick of the week and blog posts and all sorts of content, stuff for you to talk about. You can, you know how websites work. You can also go to revision3.com/iFanboy. All the video shows are there, and there's a link to the Revision 3 forums where there's more talking going on.
About Victorian era.
Yeah.
So.
I say, let's retire from small tea then.
Blustery. Good day, sir.
Hyde. Nemo loves to kill. That chap's got a rather large harpoon gun. Wilhelmina, she's a spirited filly, yes? They're very spirited indeed. There's our stories.
All day long.